Canada is a massive country compared to most of the world. It's the second largest country in the world by area, but has a tiny population of just 36 million people. Splitting this country up was never going to be easy, and since 1867 this has been something that Canadian politicians have had to try to deal with. In this new series, I will be looking at how the Canadian provincial borders came to look the way they do, and at some of the proposed provinces that didn't quite make the cut. Some of these proposals have come and gone, and will likely never be spoken of again. Others, like today's province, the Maritime Union, continue to come up in discussions today in locations from the kitchen table to Parliament Hill. The Canadian Maritime provinces are the smallest in the country, both economically and by population. To acquire power for the region, or to save costs for the rest of the country, every decade or two the idea of a maritime union between Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island pops up in the provinces or in Ottawa. There are even some politicians who are looking to unite all of Atlantic Canada, forming an Atlantic Union with Newfoundland and Labrador. For geographic, economic, and historical reasons, an Atlantic Union is not necessarily a realistic prospect, and this video will focus on the Maritime Union. But I will include it in my provincial comparisons later on in the video, so I thought I should introduce that idea as well. So, is it realistic that the Maritimes might want to unite? And would this be beneficial to them or to Canada as a whole? Let's dive into some of the times this has been talked about for real. The idea of a maritime union is by no means a new one. For one thing, PEI and New Brunswick were once part of Nova Scotia. PEI, then known as St. John's Island, was absorbed into the British colony of Nova Scotia at the conclusion of the 7 Years' War in 1763, and would remain there until 1769 when it was split into its own colony. New Brunswick, which formed the bulk of the French colony of Acadia, was also absorbed in 1763 and was partitioned into its own colony in 1784. The Maritimes existed as their own separate colonies alongside the province of Canada and the colony of Newfoundland until a conference was called in Charlottetown in 1864. The Charlottetown Conference was initially intended to be a meeting between the maritime colonies, and the main topic of conversation was to be the idea of forming a maritime union. This was highly desired by the British, who hoped that by uniting, the maritime colonies might become more powerful and self-sufficient. The province of Canada asked that the agenda be expanded to include discussion of a union with Canada, and this was accepted by the maritime provinces. Newfoundland also asked to be included in the conference, but found out about it too late to send any delegates. What came out of this conference was the 1867 union of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick with Canada, which was divided into Ontario and Quebec, forming the beginning of the Canada that we all know and love today. PEI was not satisfied with the terms of Confederation and would not join until 1873. Following Confederation, Canada's growth exploded, fueled by the large-scale manufacturing industries that were established in Ontario and Quebec. Population growth was limited as immigrants bypassed the Maritimes for the industry of central Canada, or the wide-open farmland of the prairies. This trend continues today, and many Maritimers still feel as though they've been neglected by the rest of the country. Confederation was, after all, their idea. The issue of a maritime union is, at its core, an attempt for Maritimers to gain a greater share of the economic benefits and power in Ottawa. There is support for this movement from both inside and outside the Maritimes. A unified Maritimes would increase its economic strength, spending less on healthcare, education, and government services like motor vehicle registration. These services could easily be shared over a region that, even united, would still be the smallest geographic province in the country. Additionally, there are 140 provincial politicians in these three provinces that could easily be knocked down to a fraction of this number if the provinces were combined. With all that being said, a maritime union might sound like a foregone conclusion, but there are some large challenges associated with unifying the Maritimes that would have to be sorted out before any formal union could come into existence. Firstly, what would the capital city of the Maritime Union be? Halifax is the largest city in the Maritimes by far, with a metro population of 403,000 people. This may not play well with the French-speaking population of New Brunswick, however, as just 2.6% of Halifax population is French-speaking, compared to its 89.6% of native English speakers. It is also in the far southeast of the region. The second largest city in the region, Moncton, would potentially make more sense. With a metro population of 145,000, Moncton is still large for a maritime city. It is also located very centrally within the Maritimes, being near the Nova Scotia border and near PEI's link to the mainland, the Confederation Bridge. This is, in my opinion, the most logical choice of capital for a unified Maritimes, but will require the construction of a new legislative building, as Moncton is not currently a provincial capital, and will require Nova Scotia and PEI to accept that they would no longer possess their head of government within their own regions. Other proposed capitals over the years include Sackville and Amherst for their central locations, and the interesting but impractical idea of a rotating capital where the legislature would be housed in each province's capital building on a 3-year rotating basis. There would also be the matter of federal representation. If the goal of uniting the maritime provinces is to increase their political power in Ottawa, this plan might actually be counterproductive. Currently, each of the 3 maritime provinces has been guaranteed a minimum number of seats in the House of Commons and the Senate. While this only amounts to a handful of seats in the House, the Senate guarantees that these 3 provinces have a collective 24 seats, which is the same number given to each of Canada's largest provinces, Ontario and Quebec, and 11 more than all of Western Canada combined. Critics of this policy argue that their small populations relative to the other provinces make this an unjust distribution of these seats, giving undue power to the Maritimes. It is unclear whether these guarantees will be honored in a unified maritime province, and if not, surely that would be a big strike against this idea for the people of the Maritimes. Then there would be the issue of official languages. Currently, New Brunswick is Canada's only officially bilingual province. The Acadians of New Brunswick would likely be heavily opposed to any union which did not include French as an official language, but English-speaking Nova Scotia and PEI would likely find the addition of French to everything from driver's licenses to legislative proceedings to be expensive and cumbersome. Additionally, the Maliseet and Mi'kmaq indigenous nations would likely use this union as an opportunity to establish a status for their languages in the laws of the new province. This would further increase the costs of the union, but it would perhaps help to correct an injustice, and if implemented in a practical manner, could be one of the positives of a maritime union. Finally, there would be the issue of what to call the province. Proposed names over the years have included Acadia, the original French name given to the region, New Acadia, the Maritimes, or by the name almost given to PEI, New Ireland. I will stick with the Maritime Union as it's straightforward and to the point. So, how would the Maritime Union stack up against the other Canadian provinces? Right now, PEI is the smallest province in Canada, with an area of 5,700 square kilometers. The next 2 smallest provinces are Nova Scotia at 55,000 square kilometers and New Brunswick at 73,000 square kilometers. If the Maritimes were united, they would still be the smallest province in the country, with a total area of 134,000 square kilometers, well behind Newfoundland and Labrador's 405,000 square kilometers. In fact, even in the case of an Atlantic Union, including the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, this would still be Canada's smallest province, coming in at 539,000 square kilometers, well behind 6th place Manitoba, and only a third of the size of Canada's largest province, Quebec. But geographic size is a far less important measure than population, and this is where the Maritime Union starts to gain some traction. Looking at the breakdown again, PEI is the smallest province, with just 155,000 people, and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have 772,000 and 965,000 people respectively. This puts the provinces at 7th, 8th, and 10th in overall population. The Maritime Union would have a total population of 1.9 million, making it Canada's 5th largest province, surpassing Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Adding Newfoundland and Labrador would bring the population up to 2.4 million people, which would be significant, but still well shy of 4th place Alberta. Another important measure would be the economy, especially in the Maritimes, which have been historically lacking in financial stability. While GDP is a very flawed measure of economic output, I will be using it here for comparative purposes, as it is an easy number to obtain for every province, and I think it still gives an overall picture of a province's economic situation. Once again, PEI comes in 10th place with a GDP of $6.6 billion, with New Brunswick in 8th at $36 billion and Nova Scotia in 7th at $43 billion. This is another area where the Maritime Union idea seems to make sense, as the combined province of the Maritime Union would boast Canada's 5th highest GDP at $85 billion, creating a large tax base to service this modest population with. Once again, adding Newfoundland and Labrador would not boost the ranking of the new province, but GDP would jump to $119 billion. This is less than half of 4th place British Columbia, but with such a large population difference, this is quite a high GDP for Maritime or Atlantic Union. This brings me to the last measure I'm going to be looking at in this series, GDP per capita. One of the major reasons these provinces have historically considered uniting is an increase in economic prosperity. So other than the political issues I talked about earlier, I would consider this the most important indicator as to whether or not this idea makes sense. Unfortunately for advocates of the Union, combining these 3 provinces will not solve their economic difficulties, at least not as they stand now. Currently, PEI has the smallest GDP per capita at $44,000 per person, followed closely by Nova Scotia at $45,000 and New Brunswick at $47,000. Combining these provinces together, you simply get the new lowest GDP per capita of $46,000 per person, well behind next lowest Quebec's $50,000 per person. And while Newfoundland and Labrador has a fairly healthy GDP per capita at $63,000 per person, uniting them in an Atlantic Union would only be able to bring this number up to $49,000. It is only with Newfoundland and Labrador that this idea might make an economic impact, but because of this drag to an already struggling Newfoundland economy, it seems unlikely that the people of Newfoundland would be willing to join in. So, should the maritime provinces of Canada unite? There are many good arguments for this, especially around the efficiency of shared services and increased access to revenue for Nova Scotia and PEI, and I think that this could be better for Canada as a whole, but overall, the high level of regional loyalty in these provinces, combined with the potential loss of representation in both the House of Commons and the Senate, and the economic drag on some of the more well-off provinces in the region, will likely prevent a full union from forming anytime soon. What is more likely is that we will see a strengthening of the level of shared services between the maritime provinces, increasing efficiencies for all of them, while preventing the loss of their autonomy.
Thanks for watching. I hope you liked the first video in my This Could Have Been a Province series. If you liked this video, please give it a like, and for more videos like it, consider subscribing. It really helps me get the channel out there so that more people can see it. Also, if you have any ideas for this series or any other videos, leave me a comment below. See you next time.